Alright, so I am yet again skipping Flaming Moe's, even though it won that poll a few months back. And why, you might ask? Well, I have almost 1,300 subscribers, and none of you are turning out for my videos, so why should I make good on my commitments? I'm half joking. To be honest, I think Flaming Moe's has more value as an episode I keep saying I'm gonna do a video on, but then just never do the video on. Like, everybody's talked about Flaming Moe's, so, you know, there's that. Instead, I want to talk about an episode that has a moderate personal connection to me. A Season 2 episode of all things, the 5th one I have done. By the time I get to video 50, I'll have to do a statistical rundown of what seasons I've done the most of, the least of, and which ones on average have the highest scores. But I'm only halfway there, so that whole paragraph was literally just fluff. So let's just talk about Dead Pudding Society. Dead Pudding Society is part of that era where the show was going through its identity crisis. Season 1 felt like a cartoon. Season 2 felt different from Season 1, but wasn't really in line with what the show would become in Season 3 onwards for the most part. Sure, there's a few standout episodes that feel a little more in line with what the show would become, but the majority of Season 2 episodes feel very late 80s, early 90s sitcom-y in its subject matter and its writing. And in many cases, that's not exactly a bad thing. There are still some very entertaining Season 2 episodes that adhere more to this primetime sitcom vibe than what The Simpsons would become. But the sad reality is it doesn't feel like the show we all know and love yet. And while The Simpsons at this point was still a cartoon, they had a lot more boundaries to what characters could do and how stories could be told. There's exceptions, but they're clearly present. It's also worth noting that a lot of characterizations weren't quite there yet, and when they were pretty much at their baseline. With all that aside, Dead Pudding Society is a very simple premise that plays off Homer instigating his rivalry with Flanders and using Bart as a means to get one over on Flanders by competing with Flanders' kid Todd. Antiquity-era Simpsons really like to show that Flanders had it way better in every conceivable way than Homer. Right off the bat, we get a demonstration of this as Homer has to mow the lawn with his old non-powered grass cutter. Sometimes I look at like these old episodes where it shows Flanders like flashing his privilege at Homer, and it almost borders on Flanders being antagonistic sometimes, albeit unknowingly and with good intentions. And you know what, before I get into this, I kind of want to get into something I haven't really put much thought into, but while watching this episode it kind of came up. For a man of God who follows the Bible and the commandments to a T, Flanders sure does live a life of excess. Like, really think about it. The Christmas setup, the giant RV, the rumpus room, the beach house, and every aspect of Flanders' life is pretty excessive. Obviously the goal behind this is to show that Homer is not as well off as Flanders, or perhaps isn't as smart with his money, and perhaps it's meant to invoke Homer's envy and make him seem like the sinner. But really, Flanders throughout this whole thing seems like he's guilty of the sin of pride and possibly greed. For a man who lives such a life of excess cannot be said to be without sin. Nah, but instead of digging into that because I'm not a Simpsons theory guy, let's go with Homer being jealous that Flanders has a better home life than him.
I'm not perfect. Like Ned Flanders.
Which is what sets this whole episode's plot off. On a hot Saturday, Flanders invites Homer over for a beer, and what Homer sees is a man who lives a better life than he does, and eventually Homer gets the feeling that Flanders is trying to rub it in. In Homer's words,
All right, knock it off!
Knock what off, Simpson?
You've been rubbing my nose in it since I got here. Your family is better than my family. Your beer comes from farther away than my beer. You and your son like each other. Your wife's butt is higher than my wife's butt. You make me sick.
Now, one thing I will give credit to with Season 2 is, for the most part, it picks a plot and it goes with it. An issue that Prime Simpsons has is the whole opening main plot transition sometimes feels kind of weird and off-putting when you really look at it. I feel I should note that there is a slight difference between opening and main plot progression and opening and main plot transition. What we get in Dead Pudding Society is progression. It starts by establishing that Homer and Flanders are having a thing, which then kind of evolves into the whole mini-putt storyline that I'm going to get to shortly. Opening and main plot transition would cover an episode like, say, Secrets of a Successful Marriage, where initially Homer's teaching a class at a community learning center or whatever, and then it kind of pivots into this whole marriage crisis thing. Now, that's not particularly a poor example of opening to main plot transition, but it's very jarring that it just somehow got there. And one could argue that yes, it is progression of the plot in some form, but I do appreciate it when a Simpsons episode picks a direction and stays the course. Season 2, 90% of the time, starts with a plot, and that plot is relevant to where the episode goes from A to B. Case in point, after Homer and Flanders fight, we get an early Lovejoy appearance, which leads to Flanders writing an apology letter. And, this whole scene where Homer catches Flanders slipping the letter under his door, which then leads to Homer laughing at the letter and reading it at the breakfast table, is just one of the great moments of Season 2. I would consider it a defining moment of the Simpsons family.
And yet, I feel a great sadness in my bosom. Wait, there's more.
Like, this whole moment where Flanders literally poured his heart into this letter, and then the Simpsons family is just mocking it and laughing at how sappy and corny it is.
Neighbors forever. Oh no! Dead Flanders.
What a sap. Read the bosom part again, Dad.
This moment just kills me. Like, everything about it is so hilarious. Everything from how it's drawn to the pacing and the timing between laughs. They were so on the ball, both in the writer's room and in the recording studio when they did this. And to cap it all off, Marge tries to be the voice of reason and tries to shame Homer and the family for laughing, but then she just creeps off to snicker in the hallway. This is a beautiful Simpsons family moment. Like, if I was to compile a series of moments to introduce someone who likely was in a cave on Mars with their eyes shut and their fingers in their ears, who had no idea what The Simpsons was about, like, I'd put this sequence in that compilation to kind of give them the idea what kind of family they are. It's that much of a defining moment.
Just a minute. Bosom.
So from there, the family decides to spend a bit of time together, and Homer takes Bart to Mini-Putt and shows that he is terrible at it. And as luck or fate, depending on how you look at it, would have it, the Flanderses are there too. What seems like them possibly patching things up turns into Homer once again getting competitive when they see that there's a mini-golf tournament. Now, this whole little sequence and Bart's attitude towards this is something that resonates with me on a deeper level.
Wow, first prize, $50. Wow, free balloons for everyone who enters.
When they see the advertisement for it, Todd is thinking high, and then Bart is thinking low. The entire plot for Bart is that he has no confidence in winning, and we learn that Bart has never won anything in his life. This resonates with me because I never really wanted anything. I was not athletic, I wasn't great at sports, I didn't have much in the way of academic skill, and while I was a competent writer and actor, you didn't really win trophies for that. The bar for me was so low that if I got like an A- on a project or a test, like that was a trip to the toy store or a new video game. Which, to put into perspective, I know a lot of kids were like this, but I actually knew kids who were like straight A students and like they didn't get shit. I knew this one kid who got like an A- once and he started bawling because he thought his dad was gonna like kill him. The only thing athletic or competitive that I was remotely okay at was swimming. During one of the swim meets, I think I got like a second or third place ribbon. I tried out for a few sports teams, didn't work, ADHD, I wasn't great at following instructions, I wasn't winning spelling bees or academic decathlons or whatever kids who are good at things do. I want to iterate, I wasn't like bitter or jealous that other kids were good at stuff and got trophies or awards or anything, but it was something that I initially wanted for myself, and when I realized I couldn't get it because I just simply was not built for that, I did get kind of shitty and depressed about it. But yeah, Bart's whole attitude and the whole thing with his trophy case filled with like participant, everyone gets a trophy day really speaks to me. I didn't achieve shit in school. So naturally, Homer tries to coach Bart for this golf tournament, but if you recall, just a few minutes ago, Homer was really bad at mini-putt and has no idea how to coach Bart on it. So Lisa steps in to help Bart and actually finds a way to get through to him. So I gotta go over this again because every time I see Lisa actually acting like a kid, I just need to point it out because I hate the direction they took her character later in the series. But for as flawed as seasons 1 and 2 are, they actually got Lisa right and made her character not annoying or unlikable. They managed to make Lisa distinct enough from Bart that she could be her own character. Like, she was obviously smarter and more level-headed, but the character was still written as a kid. So she would take part in antics such as making a spectacle at the opera or laughing when Homer reads Flanders' letter. And here, she steps in to use what she knows to help Bart, teaching him how to clear his thinking using philosophy, and she even figures out that mini-golf as a core concept is based on physics and geometry and is able to calculate the sweet spots that Bart needs to hit. I actually really like the idea of Lisa stepping up to help Bart and Bart actually being receptive objective to it. I have a very long-running theory that Bart isn't stupid or dumb or suffering from the Simpsons gene or even a delinquent. It is my opinion that Bart just suffers from severe ADHD and henceforth can't process things in the same way that a kid who didn't have ADHD would. But I do really like the dynamic, especially early on, like in the first few seasons, that Lisa is actually able to reach Bart in ways that others can, and she is able to push him to succeed. But where was Lisa during Bart Gets an F? Oh, and a solid Karate Kid parody shows up.
Bart, what are you doing? Get down from there before the neighbors see.
Hey, Simpson!
So with Bart's newfound improvement and Homer being a dick, the ante is upped and a bet is placed. The bet states that whoever's son loses has to mow the other's lawn while wearing their wife's Sunday dress.
You have yourself a bet, you jackaninny!
Even a contract is signed. And I do like how Homer tries to micromanage Bart after Lisa has managed to get him to improve. You know, Bart's come a long way, and then Homer comes in to try and muck it up because he's stupid.
Anybody can try! I want you to win!
Yeah, like earlier on, you get a little bit of jerk-ass Homer here, not in like the same way, but he's an asshole. Doesn't know how to properly condition Bart, he yells at the dog, and then he tries to use techniques that couldn't possibly work.
Now this is a picture of your enemy, Todd Flanders. Every day, I want you to spend 15 minutes staring at it and concentrating on how much you hate him and how glorious it will be when you and Charlene annihilate him.
Who's Charlene?
I'll show you who Charlene is. Now start hating.
And even the morning before the tournament, he disregards Lisa's instructions.
A lumberjack's breakfast for my little golfer.
Mom, Bart is on a strict diet of complex carbohydrates. Steak will make him logy.
Oh, well, what won't make him logy?
Oatmeal.
Oatmeal?
Oats are what a champion thoroughbred eats before he or she wins the Kentucky Derby.
Newsflash, Lisa. Bart is not a horse. Eat your steak, boy.
But to be fair, in Homer's defense, I'm going to go ahead and say Lisa was a little misdirected. Now, she did say that Bart was on a diet of complex carbs, so maybe jumping right to protein would cause loginess. But I think a high-protein breakfast is just as efficient as a carb-heavy oatmeal. Keep in mind, golf isn't a sport where, you know, Bart would be running or using a lot of cardio. Golf is a mental sport. Granted, I think, you know, if he was eating nothing but complex carbs and then he dumped a bunch of protein and grease on himself, he'd probably get logy after, but nevertheless. The tournament starts and it's intense, it's competitive. Bart and Todd are neck and neck the entire time, and in the end, they both decide they don't want to finish.
This is pretty tense, isn't it, Todd?
Yeah, my knees are shaking, I got butterflies in my stomach, but I guess this builds character.
Who wants to build character? Let's quit.
Okay.
And it's decided that it's a draw, which may leave you asking who has to do the deed. And it all ends with both fathers losing. However, in a more realistic way, Homer loses because Flanders, being the happy-go-lucky guy that he is, actually starts to enjoy it and see the humor in the situation. And that's the end of the episode. So before I give this a grade, you're probably asking what my personal connection is to this episode. Well, besides the whole thing with Bart and the trophies and lack of confidence, which I already went over, Dead Putting Society was a Season 2 episode. Season 2 was the first season of the show I ever owned on DVD, back when TV shows on DVD were a relatively new development. The problem was, it was Season 2. These were episodes that at the time I rarely saw in syndication, and when I did, I would normally be like, it's an old one. And instead, I'd throw the GameCube or the N64 on or something. Dead Putting Society was an episode that I watched somewhat regularly because it was above average in comparison to the rest of the season. It was funny, I enjoyed it, and I was able to appreciate it at an age where my favorite episodes were contained within the middle prime seasons. I've watched this episode more times than I'd like to admit, out of necessity. Whenever I was at a friend's place and we wanted to throw The Simpsons on and this was the only set available, we usually went straight to the Halloween special and then this, which was on the same disc. Assessing it now that I'm a bit older, I have to say it's not a perfect episode, but it's a pretty damn decent episode given where it's located in the chronology. It's funny, it has good character moments, and it's a very point A to point B affair. It's a simple premise, but the writers knew how to use the characters to make it engaging. And looking at it, it kinda gives me shades of King of the Hill. It's very King of the Hill-esque in its writing. It has a very realistic premise and a dramatic but still realistic conclusion where Bart and Todd decide, screw it, this isn't worth the anxiety, let's just quit. And I know there's some old boomer that would say, fucking millennials, but I think Bart and Todd were able to learn that there are bigger things than winning, and that a kid's mini golf tournament for a $50 prize isn't the most important thing in the world, especially if one has to go back and face their parent after being humiliated. And I kinda like how Homer's behavior eventually just drags Flanders kind of down to his level. Flanders tries to be Flanders and play the whole may the best man win thing and keep it clean and full of sportsmanship, but by the end his feud with Homer starts to infect his common sense and he's being more aggressive and acting like a sports dad. Homer is obviously worse. Homer is the antagonist of this episode and he's definitely more obsessive, but it just goes to show that it's not okay to try and live vicariously through your child. And I'll give him props for this because they could have just as easily taken Homer and Flanders and made them compete with each other directly and that could have been an episode. But by getting more creative, taking a more creative route and changing it so that both men include their children, the stakes were higher and therefore it made the whole plot more interesting. Because yeah, people like to live vicariously through their children for a lot of things and it's not okay. If I had to rate Dead Pudding Society, I think I could easily toss a 7.5 out of 10 on it because it is a very well crafted episode, it makes the most of its subject matter and characters, and despite having the more subdued early Simpsons writing, it does manage to have some really funny moments contained within it. And unlike a lot of Simpsons episodes, it's not constricted by its 22-minute time limit. It manages to get to point A to point B, you don't feel like you're missing anything, and it's pretty good for that. But the biggest mystery of all is contained somewhat within this episode. It's a mystery that they never truly followed up on. What is the deal with Lisa's library friends? We should have gotten a Lisa Spotlight episode to develop her relationship with these library people that we literally never see again after this episode. Come on, we're in season 1004, I'm sure they've run out of enough ideas to explore this obscure sequence from a season 2 episode. So what are your thoughts on Dead Pudding Society? Let me know in the comments. And next time when I muster up enough motivation to edit another video, we're gonna be taking a look at Alien Resurrection. Like, subscribe, and yeah.
Come on, Bart. Remember what Vince Lombardi said. If you lose, you're out of the family.
Homer!
Oh.